Hey everyone, and welcome to Groove Builders, the show where we create together. I'm your host, Disorderly Cone, and in this episode, we're going to be building the infamous Star Wars Metal Earth Slave 1. And this model has been known to give all kinds of builders out there trouble with all of its little bit of detail. Groovers, will we suffer the same fate? Let's check out the package together on the workbench. Groove Builders, welcome to the workbench. We have our Star Wars Metal Earth Slave 1 in some classic Force Awakens packaging. Look at that. Pretty neat. Let's go ahead and take a look at the back. On the back we have that Star Wars logo followed by a list of what this package contains. On the right hand side we get a look at the Slave 1, and then just below that we have some how-to instructions on how to build this model. But we'll go into more detail about this during our build. On the left hand side we get a QR code which we can scan to get a 360 view of our model if we need it while we're building. And then just below that we get a look at some other models in the series. Groovers, let's go ahead and open up our package. We have our instructions. Oh, looks like 2 pages. And we have our metal. Oh, it looks like maybe a little stuck in here. Let's see if we can get it out without breaking it. Ah, there we go. Groove Builders, this Slave 1 looks like it's going to be pretty big. Let's go ahead and get building. Taking a look at our first couple of steps, I can already understand why some of our metal model builders out there have said that this ship is complicated, especially because of all the unique bends and shapes that we're going to have to be able to do to be able to complete the Slave 1. But just in case we have some fans of the Slave 1 that picked up this model from Metal Earth, we're going to go ahead and go through the instructions. R2? R2, those are not the instructions. That's a picture of Leica. Ah, there we go. Although that was a cute picture of Leica R2. These are the most recent instructions released by Metal Earth, and if you have a package that looks similar to mine, your instructions will look a little bit different, but it's only at the beginning. The actual directions themselves are exactly the same, so I'm going to go ahead and use these ones here. Thanks again, R2. Starting at the top, we have that Star Wars and Metal Earth logo, followed by a depiction of the Slave 1. Now just below that we have the QR code which we can scan to get a 360 view of our Slave 1 if we need it while we're building. This can come in handy when putting different parts of detail onto the Slave 1, especially on the backhand side, and it's really good for reference to make sure that you're going to hide all of your tabs. Moving right along, just below and to the left we see a parts diagram, where we see a part showing us what a tab, an insertion hole, and a fold line looks like. It's important to look ahead in the instructions and bend all of your parts according to the fold lines. If you overbend them, you do run the risk of snapping some of your parts, so always take the time and care when it comes to bending and shaping your pieces. The same thing can be said when it comes to inserting your tabs into insertion holes. They can be a little bit tricky. I recommend taking your tweezers and guiding your tabs into the insertion hole and then bending them or twisting them according to the instructions. That can be a very handy tip at different points. Moving on over to our right, we have the Almighty Legend. And the first 2 symbols we have are our engraved and non-engraved symbols. Both of these symbols describe what side of the part we need to use when it comes to building our parts, and they are seen throughout these instructions, so definitely look out for them while you're building. Up next, we have the attention point, which we really don't encounter too often when it comes to metal model building, but if we do encounter it, all we need to do is take a little bit more time and care to that particular part. It might break, or it might also be very easy to scratch. Whatever the reason, you need to pay a little bit more attention, and they're trying to draw you to that point. So just take a little bit more time and care if you encounter this symbol. After the attention point, we have the almighty circle and triangle, the 2 very things that we need to build every metal model. But in all seriousness, every single time that we encounter the circle here, we want to take our tabs and of course fold them over 90 degrees and as tightly as possible. When we encounter our triangles here, we want to take as much of the tab as possible in our tweezers and of course twist them 90 degrees. At the very end, when we're done all of the building and we have our Slave 1 in hand, we can go over the model and see if there's any of the tabs that we can maybe change from their twists and bends to make them look a little bit better, but I definitely recommend following the instructions while you're building the model. That pretty much sums up our legend. Now we can move over to the right and look at our tools. The first tool they recommend is some wire cutters, which are very useful for getting out all of our parts from our metal sheet. Now, I personally wait till I need the part to pull them out of my sheet, but some other groovers out there use magnetic strips and put all of their parts out. Whichever way you choose to organize your parts, it's always good to make sure you take as much of the metal off of your part as possible when it comes to taking them off of the metal sheet. You don't want any leftover metal on your pieces because they won't line up properly when putting everything up together, and you'll be left with massive gaps in your model. Next up, we have the all-important tool when it comes to building these metal model kits, and that is tweezers. And not every set of tweezers are necessarily good for building these metal models. You need some really strong tweezers to build these, and you'll notice that in my videos, I'm actually using a set of detail tweezers, which are very useful for getting into hard to reach spots and getting those hard to reach tabs. You don't necessarily need to go out and get a set like mine to build these kits, but they are definitely useful. The next tool they recommend us using is a good pair of needle nose pliers, which are useful for bending long pieces of metal into shape, like posts, poles, foundations, large squares, and things like that. There are definitely some other tools I would recommend for building these metal model kits, especially when it comes to the Slave 1, which you'll see me using my doming set, which are very useful for building domes, cylinders, and cones. Now, I'm not expecting every groove builder to go out and purchase a doming set, so there are things around your home which you can use that are useful for building these metal models too, like marbles, which are very good for building different kinds of domes, and also things like pencils and markers, because those can help you with the different cylinders. Finding things to help you shape cones can be a little bit difficult, so I recommend going out and getting a few different sizes of dowels and then sharpening them with a pencil sharpener. This will get you a few different ends to use to help you shape some of these cones. And with that, we sum up our tools. Let's move on down below to our two parts diagrams. These two parts diagrams are our metal sheets, and I definitely recommend taking your two metal sheets and orientating them to the two pictures right here. And that's because it becomes a lot easier for us to be able to find our parts. One thing you may notice when looking at the parts diagram is that there's different colors represented on the two metal sheets. These different colors represent duplicates of the same part. So, for instance, part 12 right here, which is like a green part, is also right here. So most likely in the instructions, you're going to encounter a part 12 twice. And with that, I think we pretty much sum up our instructions for the Slave 1. R2, are you ready to share the history of the Slave 1? R2? R2, I know you have a little bit of a bad history with the Slave 1, and you didn't really want to do this build in the first place, but we're going to put it in a far off part of the hangar where none of the other ships are going to be. You won't have to look at it. It's just one video and we can move on, right? Oh, come on. Look, I'll give you one of those really awesome oil baths. Well, we can have C-3PO do it for you. Would you like to build him in a future episode here on Groove Builders? Alright then, our next Star Wars build will be C-3PO, so you can have your little oil bath. Are you happy now? Alright, so can put up a good picture of the Slave 1. Excellent. The infamous Slave 1 is known throughout the galaxy to be piloted by two of the deadliest bounty hunters, Boba Fett and Jango Fett. One would argue that without these two bounty hunters, the Slave 1 would have been lost to time, rotting away in a jail hangar. You see, the Slave 1 was originally a prototype police vehicle from an asteroid prison OVO 4. They were called Fire Spray Class 31s, and there were only 6 of them in the entire galaxy, making this ship very identifiable. The story as to how this ship came to be is intertwined with the pilot's life. Both Jango and Bobo made major modifications for different jobs, making the Slave 1 their own. But before I get into that, let's start at the very beginning. While escaping jail like all good bounty hunters do, Django quickly jumped into the future Slave 1 and launched 2 missiles into the hangar bay that was holding the other 5 Fire Spray class ships. He destroyed them so he wouldn't be pursued. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that left his newly acquired ship to be the only one left in existence. At least for some time, and Django would name his newly acquired ship the Slave 1. What can this ship do? Well, Django and Bobo did a lot to make this ship better than the original. For instance, the Fire-class ships sat flat on their bottom surface when parked, although during flight, the ships rotated 90 degrees to maneuver vertically. Bobo would later add a unique stabilization system which will allow for his cockpit to always be orientated up. A simple but useful modification. Some other mods that were more weaponized were the addition of 2 heavy twin blaster cannons, as well as 2 rapid-firing laser cannons. Rounding out the ship's armament were 2 projectile launchers, each holding a magazine of 3 homing missiles, and a naval mine layer equipped with seismic charges, probably one of my favorite effects in all of the films. One more little thing that Django did was devote 2/3 of the entire ship's interior to a powerful upgraded quad-drive engines and power generators, giving the Slave 1 the sublight speeds of a Y-wing starfighter. Not too bad if you ask me. Overall, the Fets definitely made this ship their own, making it one of the most feared ships in the entire galaxy, and I think that's why maybe it has such a cult following. Laika, stop biting my feet. I'm trying to play with the Slave 1. Oh, hey everyone, and welcome back. We built the infamous Star Wars Slave 1, and this build was actually a lot of fun to build together. Groovers, let's talk about it a little bit more in construction. My first point when it comes to building the Star Wars Metal Earth Slave 1 is that all of the unique detail on this ship is going to require you to either have some tools or a lot of patience to be able to form it correctly. Like these domes here on the front, I would definitely recommend trying to find either a marble or, in my case, a doming set to help you form these 2 bubbles. Yes, you can do them with tweezers, but by trying to do it that way, you're going to need a lot more time and a lot more patience. Just make sure you follow the seams if you're doing that method, and everything should turn out okay. But again, finding something as easy as a marble to help you form these 2 domes will make a difference between a really nice finished product and one that might not be as great. My second point is something that I've mentioned here on the show before. I definitely recommend pre-bending all of your tabs before you put your pieces together. This can help you put them together a lot easier and also not scratch up all the metal around the insertion holes. We all know that occasionally there's that one tab that's a real pain in the butt to get in that hole. Now you can use your tweezers to help guide that particular tab in, but you do run the risk of scratching all of the metal in the area. So I recommend taking the part off, pre-bending it just a little bit, and then trying again. You'll be surprised how easy some of these pieces can go together. My third and final point when it comes to building the Slave 1 is I definitely recommend taking a look at that 360 view that the Metal Earth team offers you on the package. And the reason for that is because of all the detail that you're placing on the ship. You definitely don't want to put something on here the wrong way. And you also want to make sure that all of your tabs are for the most part hidden. And by following the instructions and looking at that 360 model, you can definitely achieve that look. And with that being said, Groove Builders, let's move on to build time. The Slave 1 from Metal Earth took me just over 5 hours to build, with the majority of the time being spent on the back here, forming all the detail, and with these 2 domes here on the front. Groovers, I think 5 hours is going to be about average for most builders out there, especially ones that have a few ships like this underneath their belt. But remember, Groovers, it's never a race to get these things built, especially because at the very end, how much time you put into these models definitely reflects with the finished product. And finally, Groove Builders, my thoughts. Groovers, I have a confession to make. I'm not really the biggest fan of Boba Fett, Jango Fett, or the Slave 1. But after building the Slave 1 from Metal Earth, I have a whole new appreciation for this ship. Not just because of all the really cool detail that's included with it, but also because of its ability in the Star Wars universe. This thing is loaded, and if you're a massive fan of the whole mercenary and bounty hunter aspects of Star Wars, you really do owe it to yourself to pick up this ship. Personally, I think it'd be really cool if the Metal Earth team out there would go ahead and re-release this model in the Iconics kits with a whole bunch more detail and of course a bigger size like they did with the Millennium Falcon. This ship would definitely stand out in any model collection, and for the fans out there who are definitely loud and proud about the Slave 1, I think they would go nuts. And with that, Groove Builders, we're at the end of our show. I had a really good time building the Slave 1 with you, and if you guys had a good time, don't forget to press that like button. For more videos like this, hit subscribe as well, as we got all kinds of really cool content coming out in the future. Until next time, Groove Builders, keep building. Now, I'm gonna go put the Slave 1 in our hangar bay, far away from R2-D2.